I'd like you to step back from the picture and your specific problem and think about, how do we craft a foundation for internal communications that addresses those three focus areas? It starts with looking at three bigger focus areas, or three steps. The three focuses, the foci, the three areas of focus for creating a foundation for successful internal communications are planning, strategic design, and execution. Not very original. That's how you approach most problems in the world. But here's how they look if you take them each step by step. When you're planning your internal communications, whether it's using, performing a challenge assessment and figuring out which channels to use, or it's creating entire messaging campaigns that you know are going to span several months, what you need to do first is to learn how your team needs to receive communication. Depending on the size of your organization, if you're smaller, maybe 100 people or less, it's possible to focus group and find out how your team needs to receive the information. And this is going to take us a little bit outside the previous conversation, but what you are really trying to find out as the bottom line for this piece of planning is to understand people's chaos tolerance and order tolerance. Because you see, there are types of organizations that lend themselves to very order tolerant people, and others that lend themselves to very chaos tolerant people. Your chaos tolerant people are the choose your own adventure type of people. They only need to know about the end goal, and how they get there, they're fine figuring it out on their own. They need very little guidance. They absolutely resist boundaries and being held to, weekly stand-up meetings. They're the people that don't want your messaging to be too detailed or too long. They want to know where you want them to go, where you want them to end up, and they're going to do it by taking the ball and running with it. Conversely, your order tolerant people define success not just by meeting the goal, but how they get there step by step. They want to know the detailed process. They want to know the plan. They want to know how the plan will impact people around them. They are the connect the dots very closely people. What you're trying to learn by understanding chaos tolerance or order tolerance is how to craft your information sharing in a way that meets their needs. For the chaos tolerant people, if you're predominantly that in the ecosystem, you do not want to send out multi-page step-by-step instructions. You will get a lot of that TLDR response. If you have order tolerant people in your organization, usually we find a lot of order tolerant people in nonprofits and associations, because those people are used to, they're mission driven. So every piece of the process matters and is critical to them to defining their own success. And they're used to working without a lot of resources. So resource accessibility is important. So planning step by step, how are we going to get there? Spelling it out is great for your order tolerant people. So know what your team needs before you dedicate yourself to writing in any specific style. But whatever style you choose, do write with brevity, not too much brevity. Find the happy medium, and you will know that if you start putting in feedback mechanisms within your communications. People will start asking too many questions if it's too brief, and if it's not brief enough, you will receive the crickets or the TLDR response. So after you understand how your team needs to receive the information, assess your channels. Do a channel assessment, implement multimedia if necessary, and make sure that you are using just the right amount of channels, and that you understand what information needs to be on which one. And then create your content calendar. The content calendar, actually, we're going to be having I believe at the next webinar in this series is about creating content calendar, but this helps you schedule out what you know needs to go out in advance in a way that doesn't overwhelm your content recipients and allows you to build series messages and layered messages on top of each other. That you use one channel for one message, same root message, but different wording on a different channel, and building off of that. And the next slide will walk through that. So then in the strategic design phase, you're creating those layered internal communications strategy plans that built off of that content calendar you just created. You're aligning that writing style toward your team needs that you understood in your planning stage. And you're keeping in mind that comms is a two-way street. You need to make sure that you're asking for feedback as you're building this, lest you end up rebuilding it again in 6 months. Part of building trust means that consistency happens. People are allowed to have input and feedback in the thing you're creating, but that as you build it, they're part of the process. And at the end, when everything's moving smoothly, it's kind of like the news. You know, the news never reports when a plane landed successfully. The news only reports when something horrible goes wrong. It's the same way with your internal comms. If everything's going well, you're not getting a bunch of people asking questions that you already answered, or frustrated that they don't understand where to find information, or that they're overloaded and overwhelmed. So after strategic design, we go into the execution phase, reinforcing messages with deeper dives on your single source of truth, which is what we talked about earlier, driving people from the email or the newsletter to your intranet or the single source of truth that you use of your choice. Write with brevity using bullet points, allowing people to get the details, but to also be able to skim it on that single source of truth. Remember, your email or your newsletter is a blurb. It's a catchy blurb, but it's just a blurb, and it's a link, and it sends you to the intranet or your single source of truth for more information. And then invite questions via that feedback mechanism on a regular basis. You may have the link at the bottom of the email or at the bottom of the newsletter, but periodically just reach out and say, hey, how are we doing? Not necessarily in a survey. I know that most of you have experienced survey fatigue within your teams, but just a quick one-on-one reach out to a statistically significant sample size of your population will help you understand whether or not your feedback mechanism is working, and if people feel as though they're being heard. If they're giving feedback and they're seeing that there's legs on that feedback, they're more likely to trust you and engage.